Hello there, and welcome back to the show. And today I'm going to be talking about the cinematic abomination known as Madam Web. Released on Valentine's Day of this year for some reason, Madam Web was based on a Marvel character most associated with Spider Man. I personally only know her from her appearances in Spider Man the Animated Series and Spider Man Shattered Dimensions. And I've never once thought, you know what, I'd love to see a solo Madam Web movie about her origin. Never had that idea. I thought it would be cool to maybe have her involved in a Spider-Man movie, like maybe a Spider-Verse type deal, but a movie about her by herself, not as much. And I can't say I was overly anticipated, given that I wasn't really hyped about the character, also the superhero fatigue and that disastrous first trailer, so not exactly a lot working in this character's favor. I knew it was gonna be terrible, so I refused to waste my time and money going to a movie theater, paying for a ticket, and to watch this in cinemas. And a few weeks ago, I had the chance to watch Madam Web, and it was every bit the disaster I was expecting it to be. And I just want to preface this by saying, even though this video is titled Madam Web Review, this isn't really much going to be a review as much as nitpicking the issues that I found with the movie, as well as just pondering the question, why was this made? And well, let's get started. So the story of Madam Web, if you can even really call it that, is that Cassie Webb is having visions of these three girls getting murdered by a person in terrible Spider-Man cosplay, and she's on a mission to protect these girls from this guy who killed her mom in the Amazon rainforest, and that is basically the premise of this movie. Now, let's dissect everything. First of all, this movie came out earlier this year, in Valentine's Day, February of 2024, but it's set in 2003, and this movie feels like a superhero movie that would have come out in 2003. Like, I'm not even kidding, I could have genuinely seen this coming out around the same time as Hulk and Daredevil. It has that same vibe to it. Like, it is that levels of bad and cringe. Cassie Webb is an awful person. She's an EMT who hates saving people. She's not likable. The movie doesn't do a good job at making you care or feel invested in anything about her. She's supposedly on a quest to protect these girls, but she abandons them multiple times. There is nothing that in this movie made me go, you know what, I'm rooting for Madam Web. Not once. Also, the three girls that she's protecting, not even joking, I cannot even remember what their names were. They were that forgettable. They've got no memorable traits, they've got no personality, there is nothing even remotely memorable about them. And they are basically, you could have replaced them with cardboard cutouts and it would have had the same effect. The main protagonists of this movie have the same level of personality as cardboard cutouts. And speaking of horrible cutouts, this movie is horribly edited. I don't know who worked on this movie, but they should never work on feature film ever again. The editing in this movie, the constant cuts of in and outs, when they do the future flashes, they rewind it back every 10 seconds, which just kept getting more and more annoying. There is a lot of like rolls, like barrel rolls in this film for no reason whatsoever. And I'm like, the only thing I can think of is someone was wearing those beer goggles and got on a roller coaster and rode it like 20 times straight, and then got off, and then got onto the set of the Madam Web movie and started filming. That is the only logical explanation I can think of how the film is edited, because it just looks terrible. It's visual cancer to the eyes, the way this film is edited. And speaking of things that were terrible, the villain of this movie, Ezekiel. Where do I even begin? So his whole motivation is that he sees a future vision of these three girls killing him, and he's like, no, I'm gonna get them first. And the actor of this movie is horribly dubbed. You can clearly tell what lines were recorded on set versus what lines were recorded in an audio booth. Some of the lines he was saying didn't sync up with his mouth, also didn't match the tone and atmosphere of the scene they were in, so it just looked terrible. His costume legitimately looks like a terrible Spider-Man cosplay. Also, he constantly walks barefoot, but he changes into his costume, but I'm like, how does that work? That doesn't make any sense. Also, he is not intimidating or compelling by any stretch of the imagination. The way he starts out is that he's part of this expedition team to steal a spider, and he kills Madam Web's mom and the entire team. And when he returns, no one questions that he's the only survivor. So, how does that work? Just a terrible, terrible villain. Also, you could barely understand what he was saying. It just made no sense. And he is defeated by the S in a Pepsi sign. That is how he is defeated. This movie reportedly cost anywhere from $80 to $100 million to make, and I would love to know how much of that budget came from Pepsi, because there is a lot of Pepsi product placement in this movie. Madam Web is holding a can of Pepsi in a ton of scenes. There's a scene in a diner where the only beverage available is Pepsi. The climax of this movie takes place in a fireworks factory with a Pepsi sign on top, and as I mentioned, the Pepsi sign is what defeats Ezekiel, the film's main villain. Hey, Sony, listen very carefully. You would have been better off spending $80 to $100 million developing and releasing a Pepsi Man movie than this garbage. At least we could have got to hear that theme song on screen in cinemas instead of whatever this garbage was supposed to be. This was clearly a paycheck for anyone involved in making this piece of garbage, like the actors, the production team, the director. Everyone clearly signed on for this for the payday. No one seems invested in their characters. The lines feel like they were just the first take. Nothing is convincing. The script, I am confident, didn't go through any script doctors or proofreading or anything like that. They just rushed this script as fast as possible and they just started filming. Matter of fact, this script was written in the span of one day by someone who has never read a Spider-Man comic book and an AI who was only fed the Sony Spider-Man universe movies. That is it. That is what I'm thinking happened when it came to writing this script. This is one thing that boggled my mind. So Madam Web is accused of kidnapping the three girls, and she goes on the run, and they go from New York to New Jersey, and only a couple of hours have passed, and the girls are in this diner, and some dude is reading a Daily Bugle newspaper that states that, hey, three girls kidnapped, basically. And it got me thinking, so the Daily Bugle wrote, published, and circulated to a different state a news story that happened a few hours ago. How does that make any sense? Also, Madam Web is wanted for kidnapping, yet she's able to go from New York to the Amazon rainforest in Peru and come back full round trip with no issues. Did that not come up in any of the production meetings, assuming there were some, about this? Did no one bring that up? Speaking of the Amazon rainforest, there's this one scene where Cassie finds an old photo of her mom in the rainforest, and she's like, I know exactly where to go. And when she goes to the Peruvian Amazon rainforest, she finds this exact tree, which has not grown or had any vegetation or damage or anything like that. It's still the same way it was 30 years ago. Which, that is just laziness on a horrible level. And then there's the guy, and he states, I knew you'd come. He's the leader of the tribe from the beginning of the movie. And this guy states, look, I get that they can't use the name Spider-Man because they share the rights with Marvel, but Sony, come on. With great power comes great responsibility. You could get away with that, right? And they tried to rehash that line and redo it, and the way they rephrase it is something along the lines of, when you accept great responsibility, great power will come, which made me go, This has to be written by an AI. There is no way a human being wrote that line. That had to be AI generated. It had to be. I refuse to believe that a human being wrote that line. This movie is a complete bait and switch from the trailer. What we saw of the girls in their Spider-Man costumes in the trailer only happens in Ezekiel's vision. They are never in their costumes throughout the entire movie except during Ezekiel's vision and in the final scene of the movie, like the final frame. And Madam Web's costume looked hilariously awful. It was genuinely laugh out loud bad. And the sunglasses, they were so oversized and man, it was just laughably bad. There is no other way to describe the final scene of this movie. Speaking of the sunglasses, the way Madam Web loses her sight makes absolutely no sense. So Madam Web falls from a building into the river, and while she's floating down, a firework projectile goes from the building through the river, maintaining its same velocity and spark, hitting her in the eyes, causing her to go blind, but she's got no burns. What are we doing, Sony? What are we doing? Also, from what I understand, Madam Web's powers are basically seeing the future sometimes, carjacking, projecting time clones of herself. You know what, I'm done talking about that. Oh, also, the final battle is just terrible and stupid and comes off as ridiculous. This movie is Morbius without Matt Smith's dance scene. That's exactly what this movie is. The Sony Spider-Man universe, to quote Chris Jericho, was a stupid idea from bad creative. This movie should have never seen the light of day. I am frankly shocked that this film was even released. Like, Sony would rather release this, Morbius, Venom 1 than a third Amazing Spider-Man movie. What are they thinking? This film was terrible, one of the worst superhero movies I've ever seen. The worst superhero movie I've ever seen since Fan Four Stick. This film was terrible, it was horrible, it was bad. Do not waste your time watching this garbage. Stay away from Madam Web. Treat the movie like The Plague. Heck, the stars of this movie are already treating it. Dakota Johnson and Sydney Sweeney are barely defending this film, and the way they were promoting it and the way they've talked about it post-release, you're like, yep, definitely a paycheck roll. This film was terrible. This film was so bad. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram at Saeed_2000, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.